Live from the Gospel Broadcasting Network, located just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. Be a part of today's episode by calling in or interacting with us through Facebook. Now from Olive Branch, Mississippi, it's GBN Live.
Good evening. It is good to have you with us tonight for GBN Live. My name is Don Blackwell. I'm the Executive Director of the Gospel Broadcasting Network, and I am sitting in as the host tonight in place of Mike Hickson. He is out doing a gospel meeting, and I'm honored to get to fill in for him. I have with us tonight two guests, two brothers in Christ. We have Brother Randy Collum, who works with the Pine Vale Children's Home in Corinth, Mississippi. He has been there for about 6 years. And I have Brother Robert Williams, who is an elder at the Parkway Village Church of Christ here in the Memphis area. We are so glad to have both of you with us tonight. This evening, we're going to be talking about the subject, the importance of benevolence. And of course, that is important, but before we discuss the importance of it, I want to begin with this question: what is benevolence? Randy, could you speak to that and define it for us?
Sure. You've got your standard dictionary definition, which is something like showing or motivated by sympathy to understand and show some sort of a generosity to someone. And that usually includes either monetary gifts of some sort to make up for something that someone's missing, or it could be just your time. In fact, if we change that to more of a biblical definition, a lot of times you'll find it described in the scriptures as mercy and grace even being extended to someone. Or if you use a definition like charity to describe benevolence, the American Standard Version taught us anything, is that charity and love are basically the same thing. And so to show benevolence to someone is really to show them love, and as a Christian, it would be to show them Christian love of some sort.
Sure. We want to invite those who are watching to be a part of the program tonight, and you can call in and talk to us live and interact with us if you'd like to ask us questions. The number is 888-805-3390, 888-805-3390. You can email questions if you would like to do that, and we will answer them. GBNLive@gbntv.org. And if you're on Facebook watching, you can actually type messages on Facebook, and they will send those to us, and we can interact with you. We would love to have you participate and be a part of the program tonight. Sometimes when we talk about the work of the church, we say that it is threefold. We say that there is evangelism, edification, and benevolence. Of course, evangelism has to do with preaching the gospel, reaching out to those who are lost. Edification has to do with the building up and strengthening the saved or the church, and benevolence really would apply to the church and the lost, right? So when we talk about that tonight, I want to begin and ask this question. We define benevolence. Brother Robert, can a church be a faithful church of Christ, a church belonging to Christ, if it doesn't practice benevolence?
No, I don't believe it can, because benevolence, again, is one of the three pillars that we often talk about that represents the work of the church. And as you look at benevolence, you see that benevolence is kind of interwoven into the Christian character, similar to love. It's not love, but benevolence is one of the attributes that we should always demonstrate. And when it comes to Christianity without love, it's an ugly thing. Same thing, Christianity without benevolence, it becomes an ugly and unattractive thing to the world. So I think that, it's impossible to be faithful and not practice benevolence.
Sure, absolutely. A couple of Bible verses to support this. Acts 20 and verse 35, Paul said, I have shown you in every way by laboring like this that you must support the weak. He said, and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that it is more blessed to give than to receive. But it's interesting, he said to Christians, you must support the weak. You labor so that you can support the weak, and it's more blessed to give than to receive. And to the individual Christian, 1 John 3 and verse 17, but whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? It's tied to what you just said, and that is love and benevolence go together. If you have the love of God, you're going to help those who are in need. Randy, you're involved in a work that is really full-time benevolence, is it not?
Well, as much as it can be. It depends upon benevolence, both from congregations of the Lord's church as well as from individuals. And it's a means for the church to be benevolent itself through the work we do there with the children. But we tie that with those other pillars. We tie that with evangelism to not only the families of the children we care, but for the children also, and try to show them the love of Christ.
Can you tell us about the children's home? Tell us what you do and about the work, and maybe even how someone could support the work there.
Sure. The children's homes are all different in flavor. You have very institutional type homes sometimes. Obviously, a person can have children in their own home at times, and all those are needed. The children's home at Pineville in Corinth, where I work, is sort of an in-between. We help take care of children that don't need the level of care of going to an inpatient type facility, but what's happening with them at home is not working. We stopped a few years back working with any kind of government intervention, and now everything we do is a work of the church with these children, so that we put Christian parents, a set of parents in each home, and those children that come in are able to see what a structured Christian home looks like. With that, they work their way up through a progression of responsibilities, and through those responsibilities, they see what the consequences are for those. And we like to show them good consequences. When you follow, and we would say God's word, when you follow the things that are good and right, then you get what is good and right. And so we want them to learn that. And a lot of them have seen that. They've never been exposed to any kind of church, much less the Lord's church. And so that's what we have strived to do. Now, when we stopped doing that with the government, it did cost us a great bit of our income, which meant we had to kind of lower the number of children we could help. But it really opened the door up for what we could do with them, as far as the way we taught them and the way we encouraged them in the Lord, and the things we did with them. Even we have them reading Muscle and a Shovel right now and going through it. And so they are getting a full exposure, not just to Christ, but more, I think, just as important, to His church, because I can't separate the two of those in the work that we do. But our support right now is 100% from the churches, about half from congregations, about half from individuals that are mostly members of the church that want to see this work continue. And so anybody that would like to be a part of that, we're easy to find. It's the PinevilleChildren'sHome.com. We make it simple. If you can remember the Pineville Children's Home, you can remember the PinevilleChildren'sHome.com. And from there are plenty of links on how to donate, how to learn more about the work, and contact numbers there to call me directly, and we can sit and talk and have anybody by that'd like to come see that work and be a part of it.
So,
you know, when I think about children, I can't help but think about Jesus in Matthew 18, suffer little children to come unto me. Sure. For such is the kingdom. Jesus was concerned about children. And then in the book of James 1:27, he said, pure religion, is to visit the fatherless and the widows, fatherless in their affliction. So definitely our children are a good focus for benevolence, and it's something that's supported scripturally.
Yes. In fact, as you go through, in the Old Testament and in the New Testament too, but especially in the Old Testament, I find where when God talks about the care you give to others, He talks about it as the stranger, the poor, the fatherless, and the widows. Those are always included in those that God is concerned with. And I very much think He's concerned with it because He's concerned with it. Right. Those are, when we think about mercy and grace as a form of benevolence, how much mercy and grace did God show us? And if we are His children and we're supposed to be His representation here on this earth to those that are lost, how much more mercy and grace should we show to them?
That's right.
Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned James 1:27, that pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is to visit the fatherless and widows. The way the King James translates that, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, the idea people have is, I'm going to drop by and pay a visit, and I have fulfilled my Christian duty. What does that word actually mean when he says that we're to visit the fatherless and widows?
He's actually talking about providing for the needs of those who are guideless. It may be material. It also may be a spiritual guide. to those two,
Yeah.
the guideless. Mhm.
Yeah, that's right. And it really carries with it more the idea of caring for them, doesn't it?
Right.
The original language.
In fact, if you go back to Isaiah, in Isaiah, he is talking to the Israelites, he tells them about how wicked they had been and what they needed to do to get right with God. In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 16, he tells them, wash you, make clean, put away the evil you're doing from before mine eyes, cease to do evil. So, of course, we get rid of the bad stuff. And then verse 17, he adds in the others, learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, and he uses the word in the King James, judge the fatherless. And now we might say, well, why what are you going to do, send them to prison?
Right.
But it has a different kind of idea. It has that idea of governing. In fact, sometimes you hear people talking about having a governess or someone that's responsible for them. And if you're going to be responsible for their physical well-being, you better be responsible for their spiritual well-being.
That's right.
Yes.
The scripture talks about those who went around the world to convert others and then made them a twofold son of the devil.
Right.
So we don't want to do that. We want to, if we're going to see to these, in any benevolent need, if we're going to see to their physical needs, that's always coupled with their spiritual needs, the same way God would.
In fact, I just looked up the Greek word here from James 1:27 for to visit. The very first definition is to look after. And so it doesn't mean pop in and say hello, but it has to do with providing care, which is what y'all are trying to do. Let me ask you this question, because I don't know much about how the children's home works. I'm assuming that the children that would come into the home, are they not Christians? Does it make any difference whether they're Christians or not?
In the time I've been there, and I've been at Pineville for about 6 years now, I have only had 2 children that have come in that were members of were children of members of the church before.
Right.
And even those, they came in not because of neglect of the parents, but because there were issues with the child that we were suited to try to help. And so our facility is open for that. We see a lot of grandparents, extended family members having to raise their grandkids or nieces or nephews. And so that's really what the area we like to get involved with, so that we can help take that load off of the family and let them be the grandparent or the aunt or uncle for that child, and us take the day-to-day and make sure they see a Christian home.
Well, let's talk about this for a minute, Brother Robert. The idea, we talked about the 3 pillars, edification, evangelism, and benevolence. How are benevolence and evangelism tied together? Should they be tied together? I'll give you an example. I know of a congregation on one occasion that they were providing bags of groceries to take into the community. And some of the members said, let's put tracts, gospel tracts, in these bags of groceries. And some of the members objected, and they said, no, we just want the people to know that we care about them. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that? Are evangelism and benevolence tied together?
Well, we see in the Bible where Jesus fed the 5,000 that followed him, but he also taught them the gospel as well. And so I think really it's a great tool for us to connect and show that we care. Mm-hmm. And, when people know that you care, they have a tendency to be more open to us teaching them the gospel. And so I think that's a very great opportunity and an excellent idea. When I was in a small town, Yazoo City, I started a congregation there back in, I think, 1988. Mm-hmm. And we had a clothing giveaway. And we would have people from the community come, and we would give them clothing that we collected from congregations as far as Missouri. And using it, we set up Bible studies through that.
Yeah.
I was out visiting Brother Melvin Sapp a few years ago, and I was very impressed with the program that they have.
Yeah.
They have a food giveaway. Yeah. And people come in and they watch a video for 15 minutes, and they give them food, or I think it's about a monthly event. So I think that those are excellent tools to connect and show the community that we care not only physically but spiritually about.
I know Brother Melvin. I used to preach near him in South Carolina, mm-hmm. and went out and worked with him on several occasions. And as a side note, he's now trying to get a double lung transplant and is in need of benevolence. He's needing some brethren to help him with the cost of that. Mm-hmm. And if anyone's interested in finding out about that, if they'll reach out to us, we will let you know how you can help Brother Melvin raise the money that he needs for a double lung transplant. He's been a faithful soldier of Jesus Christ, and we certainly would like to help that brother with those needs. But you're right, benevolence is a door to evangelism, to teach people, because if they come in and see that we care, then they're going to be interested. If we care about their bodies, we care about their souls. It opens the door for them. And Randy, what y'all are doing really is a door to evangelism, right? Because you bring in these children and you're working on teaching them as they're growing up, and you're caring for them, right?
I mean, there are ways we could handle a lot more children, that we could feed them, we could clothe them, we could make sure they got to school. But the time that it takes, and that's what a lot of these children, that's all they were really missing. They needed more time, and they needed families that knew how to spend that quality time with them, not just quality, but quantity time with them. And that's what we're able to do.
And the good thing is they haven't been prejudiced by the world, and so they're very good soil to teach. You don't have to tear down, you can build up.
There you go. Well, we got to tear down a little bit sometimes. But
And you mentioned before the program that you had the children reading the book Muscle and a Shovel.
Yes, sir. We do that. Part of their progression through the program is memory work. We involve ourselves in programs like Lads to Leaders to some extent. They attend, the saying, every time the doors are open, we're there. And that's not just something that happens with the child, but that's something that is explained on the front end to the families. We explain to them, look, we exist because we are a work of the Church of Christ. Right. Every piece of literature that they see and we go through, we talk time and time again about the fact that we are a work of the Lord's church and what that entails. Yes. And that we expect the child simply to respect us when we go into these environments. From that, they'll learn. Even if they never convert while with us, they'll have a chance that later in life they can look back and say, look, there's someone who cared for me unconditionally, showed me mercy, showed me grace, and I know where they came from. I know they came from the church.
Yes. In working with different congregations over the years, I have tried to persuade them to investigate children's homes before they support them, because certainly we want to care for children, and certainly we want to look out for people's physical needs, but ultimately we want to put them in an environment where they're going to be taught the gospel, where they're going to be taught to Christianity, and faithful Christianity. Make sure that you know that this is a sound home that you're putting them in, and so that's what's so good.
In fact, one of my biggest obstacles, and I'm facing it right now, is finding Christian couples that want to come and be house parents. It's tough on two regards. One, there's a very small pool of applicants. There are a lot of, the church is not growing by leaps and bounds necessarily. Matter of fact, I think at the Spiritual Sword, I think I saw some slides from Brad Harrop about how many the Lord's church is losing every year, and it was kind of sad. But when you only hire faithful members of the Lord's church, your pool is kind of small. And the people I put in that house, I want to be able to put my own children, and that's the way I make my decisions. Would I put my own two girls in this house with a Christian couple?
Right.
Now it requires sacrifice. I thought I knew what blessed are the poor in spirit meant until I met a house parent. Yeah. It's not a job. It's a lifestyle. It's a commitment to this benevolent work. And as such, you don't always see the fruits of your labors in the immediate. Yeah. You have to know that later. That's what they're going to see, and that we're doing. We mentioned Matthew 25, I think earlier, or either we did that before the show. And the instructions that Christ gives there are to give water, give food, go visit. Never talks about the results of what happens, except for that you give glory to God for doing what He is His will in these things.
Right, Brother Robert. What are some ways that Christians can practice benevolence?
Again, we mentioned benevolence is not always about material. It can be about your time, the time you spend actually teaching and putting forth the effort to show the love, to teach them the gospel. Also, when we're visiting, oftentimes you'll run into, you'll see needs that people have when you go out and canvass the neighborhood. Oftentimes we see needs that we can address.
Okay.
Then,
Okay, they're telling me it is time for a break. So if you will stay tuned, we will be back with you in 2 minutes. This program is different from many other programs in that we examine videos that teach religious error and we expose that error in the light of the Bible. We always try to be kind and respectful toward those who we are looking at their videos, and we always reach out to the speakers on these videos and we invite them to publicly debate us, to discuss these things, because we believe when we are dealing with matters as important as one's eternal salvation, you can't afford to be wrong.
Thank you for tuning into GBN Live. If you have a question related to tonight's topic that you would like to have answered, please call 888-805-3390. You can also email us at gbnlive@gbntv.org. Follow us live each week, and we will do our best to get them answered on the air. Now back to the program.
This is GBN Live. We're glad that you have joined us for the program tonight. This evening, we're talking about the importance of benevolence. We're going to pick up and continue our discussion. I want to go to Matthew chapter 25 and verse 34. This is actually a scene from the Day of Judgment. And it's very interesting because Jesus has mankind divided to his right hand and to his left. Matthew 25:34 says, "Then the king will say to those on his right hand, 'Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer and say unto him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and you clothed me? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?' Now listen to this. Then the king will say to them, 'Assuredly I say unto you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it unto me.' Then he will also say unto those on the left hand, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels.'" And then he's going to go through the reasons again. He says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick, and in prison, and you did not visit me." We learn from this that benevolence is not something that just doesn't matter, that we can be flippant about. We see that on the Day of Judgment, our eternal destiny is hanging in the balance based on benevolence. Of course, that doesn't lay aside the fact that you have to be a Christian and obey the gospel. There are other passages that deal with this, but specifically here, he's talking about the importance of benevolence and my eternal damnation or salvation. Randy, speak to this for me.
Well, a couple of points on this. One, you'll notice that not a single thing on this list really cost much of anything to you. I mean, a bottle of water, if you get it at the wrong gas station, might cost you $2, but you can buy a case of it at Kroger. Food, even, I tell people all the time, I can throw another potato in the pot, and we got enough to feed one more. None of these things really cost us much. But what they do, and going back to kind of that definition, biblical definition of benevolence, is show the world what God is like. I can't imagine converting to a religion that did not show some kind of benevolence. A religion that was void of any kind of good work toward mankind. Now, that good work all day long is not our salvation. It won't save them. But what it does is show them what God is like if we're His children. In fact, that last point he makes about I was in prison and you came unto me. If you looked at the Greek word for came unto there up in Thayer's, one of the metaphorical definitions he gives is to come to know or to influence. And that's what we want to do. We want to have an influence, a positive influence on anyone in need to the gospel.
Yes.
And so that's what this list entails to me.
When I read that passage too, to reiterate what you said, it's something that everyone can do. Oftentimes, you hear people make excuses that they don't have the talent to do a particular thing, but everyone can feed the hungry, give clothing or water to the thirsty. It's something everyone can do. So there's no excuse for not doing it.
This is really a sobering passage to me because sometimes we focus so much on obeying the gospel. Person has to obey the gospel. We talk about baptism, and I'm not discounting that. A person can't go to heaven if he hasn't been baptized and washed of his sins. We talk about worshiping properly, and we have to. God is a spirit, and they that worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. But if we don't get this part right, we'll lose our souls according to this. And so a Christian could become so pharisaical, he could become so legalistic that he gets the plan of salvation right, he gets the doctrine right, and he loses his soul because really this is about love, is it not?
Right.
If he doesn't practice love for his fellow man. And so I think that's the emphasis on this passage. Here's the day of judgment, and he says, some of you are going to go to hell. Why? Because you didn't take care of your fellow man. That's very sobering. It's very scary. And I think particularly for the Pharisees of Jesus' day and the Pharisees of our day, we need to be careful not to fall into this trap.
And we can say that, well, I gave at church. So if you want benevolence, go talk to the brethren at church. But there are some individual things that we are responsible to do as we go through our daily, activities. When we encounter people that need our help, individually we should do it. I think
that's right.
Sometimes people think it's only a collective action.
When you read that right there in that chapter, didn't you? When your church gave me some water, your church gave me some food, your church came to visit me.
Right. Then you're covered.
That's right.
We should probably say on the other side of this, I have known people over the years who were members of the church, and they are very benevolent. They're very generous. They're very caring.
That's right.
But then they don't get the other things right. And so both of these things are required. You can't just say, I'm just overflowing in love and benevolent toward everyone, so God's going to love me. That's kind of the thinking of the world, isn't it?
And leave the other undone.
Yes, that's right. We're just so loving and caring, and that's all that matters to the Lord, that we have to get these things right. Here's a couple of other passages. Matthew 5:42, Jesus said, give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow, do not turn him away. Luke 3 and verse 11, Jesus answered and said to them, he who has 2 tunics, let him give to him who has none, and he who has food, let him do likewise. Of course, a tunic was an article of clothing, probably an undergarment, talking about a person who's cold. You're going to provide clothing for that person. Now, when a Christian hears passages like this, Matthew 25, this is a judgment scene. This could be scary. And then give to him who has not. Provide food for him. If a Christian is a tender-hearted person, these things could really eat at him. And then he sees a person standing on the side of the road with a sign that says, we'll work for food. it brings up an interesting question, and that is, are there con artists out there who are going to take advantage of a Christian's benevolence? What do you say to that?
Of course, we know the answer is yes on that one. And I think that we are also required to be good stewards, you know, and to be wise. And there's nothing wrong with verifying who you're giving to. That is a difficult thing that we encounter, these mystery people that you don't know where they came from, where they're going, they have no history. And so I oftentimes, when I encounter a stranger that I want to verify, I'll ask them for references, you know. There's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, that's wise.
Give me a phone number for your family, a friend, someone that I can call and verify who you are.
Yeah.
If they can't do that, then, you know.
I remember on one occasion, my father-in-law preached outside of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and there was a woman who would stand on the side of the road, and it said, need food or need help, a typical sign, and she was pregnant. And some of the locals said that they started noticing she was always pregnant. And as the years passed, she was continually pregnant. And it finally dawned on people that this was part of her scheme. She had realized that a pregnant woman's going to get more money. So people like that are out there. And like you say, a Christian's got to be a good steward and to check into those type things.
And the thing is, people like that have a tendency to hurt legitimate people.
Yes.
Because it causes us to be suspicious. You know?
Yes, that's right.
Obviously, in Luke's account of the Sermon on the Mount, in Luke chapter 6, beginning about verse 27, he talks about our enemies.
Yeah.
And what he says about our enemies is, give to every man that asketh of thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask not again. It goes on down to verse 34. He says, and if ye lend to them of whom ye hope to receive, what thanks have ye? And I don't imply that our benevolence, we're looking for anything in return. But verse 35 is where he really drives it home. He says, love your enemies and do good and lend to them, hoping for nothing again, and your reward shall be therefore, and your reward shall be great, and ye shall be, and here's, I'm hitting this nail hard, the children of the highest. How does God give to us? He goes on to say that be ye, and that's verse 36, be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Verse 38, give, and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, shall men give unto your bosom. For with the same measure that ye met withal, it shall be measured to you again. Imagine if that, and this is purely hypothetical, and I know very well from the children I deal with and the families I deal with, the psychology of someone like this. But imagine, if you will, that woman that feigned to be pregnant, if every day you stopped by and you gave her something. Every day you stopped by and gave her something. And maybe you left a track with it sometimes, maybe you didn't. Maybe you asked her to a Bible class or to worship, maybe you didn't. But every day you stopped by, and one day she was in such a real need, she wanted to know who to go to. You've showed her an influence, and who knows, that may come back, pressed down, shaken together, running over. That the influence you've had on her, even knowing. In fact, sometimes I find that the people that we help, that I'll tell the children, I know you're lying because your lips are moving. Mm-hmm. But if the people that you help, that they know, that they're not, we'll call it legitimately in need, those are the people that maybe have an actual response positively to the gospel, because they know that you help them even in that way. So
you're kind of leaning toward, if you're going to err, let it be on the side of giving.
Yes. If
you're able to do it.
Yes. And obviously we all have our limits of how far we can go with that. Mm-hmm. And anything I would say that was anti the gospel of Jesus Christ, or didn't contribute to the work of the church or give God the glory in some way, is maybe past where we need to go with it.
You mentioned something that just triggered a thought with me. Something that people view in the world as benevolent frequently would be something like the Salvation Army. And they would think, I can give through that means to help people, but many people may not realize that the Salvation Army is a religion.
Right.
And so when you are supporting or giving through the Salvation Army, then what ends up happening is, even if they give all of it, the glory of that is going to go to this denomination. And
Right.
we've got to be very careful of that. Christians don't need to do that sort of thing.
Right.
Which is always why I advocate, if within your means, to personally be benevolent to someone personally, even more so than organizations a lot of times.
Yeah, and you were mentioning, as you were talking, I thought about Matthew 6:20, about laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven rather than upon this earth. And you're doing that sort of thing. As you're giving, it's costing you money, but you're laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven. When will this come back? It's Matthew 25, at the judgment scene, when the Lord is going to say, you've done this unto the least of these.
That's right.
You know, we would say that person that's the con artist is sinning by what they're doing. But Peter wrote in 1 Peter 4, 8, and 9, and above all things have fervent charity. Now, King James uses the word charity, among yourselves, for charity shall cover the multitude of sins. And I'm, like I said, I'm not saying that everybody you should let just take advantage of you, but err on the side of grace and
But a
mercy.
Christian is going to be taken advantage of at times, even when you're practicing good stewardship. And I want to talk some more about that in just a minute. But we are going to be taken advantage of. I can remember when I was preaching in the church at North Charleston that we would try to screen people. We didn't want to just give money to people who were going to misuse it, but sometimes they would get us. But I believe we still laid up treasures in heaven because we were doing what we thought was best. We were trying to use good judgment. People fool you sometimes.
And they may mean it for evil, but God would take it, make it turn out to the good in your life.
Yes,
Because
for our
what their
part, yes,
intentions
that's
are.
right. If you would like to be a part of the program tonight, we would love to have you join us. The number is 888-805-3390. You can call in and ask a question and leave it with the person answering the phone, or you can call and interact with us. We would love to talk to you live. You can email us at gbnlive@gbntv.org or interact with us on Facebook. And we've got folks watching our Facebook page. And if you want to type in a question, they will pass it along to us that we can deal with on the air. I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of a Christian practicing good stewardship. I remember on one occasion that I was in Charleston, South Carolina, where I grew up, and I preached for several years. And I had walked outside of a Kmart, and a man stopped me, and he said, I need some money. He said, because my fan belt's broken on my car. And I said, well, where are you from? He said, well, I'm traveling from Texas, and I'm going to, someplace up north. And I said, why are you going through South Carolina? That's really out of your way. And he had a story. And I said, can I see your Texas driver's license? He said, I forgot my license. I said, you're traveling from Texas to this location and you forgot your license? And he said, yes. And I said, well, where's your car? And he said, oh, it's several miles down the road. And he said, why are you asking me so many questions? And I said, because I just want to make sure you're legitimate before I help you. I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, are you a Christian? And I said, yes. He said, then your job is to give money to the people who ask. He said, what I do with it is between me and the Lord. And I said, well, I don't want you to take my money and go out and buy alcohol. He said, if I do that, God's going to hold me accountable. Your job is to give me money.
Wow.
I was stunned.
Wow.
I've never heard someone make such a blatant comment as that. We do have to be good stewards. I asked him, can I take you to your car? And he refused. And so I finally got in my car and I drove off, and I felt like I had not in any way failed in my Christian responsibilities. Because the Lord does have some qualifiers in the Bible. I was thinking about, there are qualifiers to so many things. I think about one that gets abused oftentimes is Matthew 7 and verse 1, judge not that you be not judged. Mm-hmm. And people misuse that, and they'll say, well, we can't judge. You're a Christian, you shouldn't judge me. But there are qualifiers on that, right?
Right.
And people use, when you talk about works, people want to go to Ephesians 2 and verse 8, that we are not saved by works. But there are qualifiers. It's a certain type of work. And even on benevolence, there are qualifiers. And we talked about some before the program relating to taking care of widows. And Randy, you mentioned some of that from 1 Timothy 5, did you not?
Well, sure. The 1 Timothy has those qualifications of the age of the widow and the work that she has done, even including several benevolent acts that Paul includes in there. This is the work she should have done if she wants to be a part of this. And so it's almost you can't wait until you get in the situation and then come in and say, "Oh, now I don't want to give, but I want to receive all that benevolence."
Let me read that. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 9 says, "Do not let a widow under 60 years be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported of for good works, if she's brought up children, if she's lodged strangers, if she's washed saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work." It's very interesting that the Lord would lay out these qualifications to help this woman, but he said, here are some qualifiers, and that is, this is a woman who has been faithful in the service of the church.
So there's a lot of us that might not qualify.
That's true.
But,
That's true.
I think it's worth pointing out that the qualification there, what the church would be doing with that widow, is taking on a full responsibility for her.
That's right.
And so that wouldn't disqualify her from, hey, if I know she's without food, I can take her food. If I know she needs to get to somewhere, I can go take her somewhere.
Yes.
The same with like the individual you spoke with, and it seemed like that's what you tried to do was let me see to your need, not just hand you money.
Yes.
And we mentioned all the things in Matthew 25. None of these cost money. They just take your time.
Yes.
What do the children need at the children's home? They need your time.
Yes.
And so there are lots of ways we can go about filling those benevolent needs. I preached down the road here in Ashland, Mississippi when I first got out of preaching school. And we had a habit, if someone came by and needed gas, we said, go down to this gas station, tell them you're from us. If you need food, they'll give you a meal. They'll give you, put gas in your car, and we'll pay the bill. Or go down to the grocery store if you're from the community, and they know to let you have so much worth of groceries, and we'll cover the bill. And they knew the qualifiers, the alcohol and tobacco products were not on that list.
That's right.
But we're going to make sure you get your needs taken care of. So that's one way we kind of tried to weed out, we'll say, those that were just trying to take advantage of us.
Well, it is time for us to take another break. If you will stay tuned, we will be back with you in just a moment.
So how do you know whether your Bible has been corrupted? The youngest part of the Bible is about 2,000 years old. It's an old book. And it came from Greek, went into Latin, and then to English. So it's kind of like the game telephone, right? So how many of you know why we can actually trust the Bible? Anybody think it's been corrupted? Anybody want to maybe try to explain this one to us?
I never checked to see if the things I'd always believed were in there. So test everything.
We examine videos that teach religious error, and we expose that error in the light of the Bible. Because we believe when we are dealing with matters as important as one's eternal salvation, you can't afford to be wrong.
Jesus basically said that the only way that you're going to go to hell is over his dead body, so to speak. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, people say that, over my dead body. Yeah, literally that's what he did.
Yeah.
You can watch the latest episodes after tonight's show. To find out more, visit GBNTV.org.
Welcome back to GBN Live. Tonight we're talking about the importance of benevolence. We spent a few minutes tonight in Matthew chapter 25 talking about the fact that benevolence is actually one of the things that is going to be brought up by the Lord on the day of judgment, and that a man could be a faithful Christian in other ways. He could have obeyed the gospel. He's a baptized, faithful believer in his attendance. He worships properly, but he doesn't practice benevolence and could lose his soul. That's how serious the subject is that we're talking about, and we emphasize that because we're talking about the importance of benevolence. In fact, we were even talking about during the break that sometimes maybe we underemphasize this in the Lord's church, but it's so very, very important. Could you imagine being faithful to the Lord and then on the day of judgment hearing the words, "Depart from me," being on the left-hand side of God because you did not practice benevolence? And so each of us needs to look inside and ask ourselves these questions. Am I doing this? In fact, it's been sobering to me to make me stop and to think about this. As we're talking about giving benevolence, we talked about some qualifiers. We even looked at 1 Timothy 5 about bringing a widow in to be taken care of by the church. But one thing that comes up oftentimes when you talk about benevolence is 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 10. The Bible says, "If a man will not work, neither should he eat." And so practicing benevolence toward a person to some degree depends on why that person has the need. Mm-hmm. Let's say the man's lazy and he doesn't want to work. Brother Robert, should we support that man?
I don't think so. And that is something that I have commonly seen in my ministry, where there are people who come along and they basically want to use the church as a means of supporting them because they refuse to work, make excuses for the work that's available. And I would even extrapolate that even to preaching. Sometimes people preach just for the money, not really caring about the church, and so they'll move from one congregation to another sometimes just for a paycheck. And I think that's abusing the church. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, he doesn't say if a man cannot work, neither
won't.
should he eat. He says if a man will not work, neither should he eat. So the Lord makes a distinction. If there's an able-bodied man and he's just lazy and would decide to just mooch off of the church, then we're not to help him. So the Lord actually is requiring us to make some kind of a judgment about him, isn't he?
Well, if you go back and consider the things he gave in the Old Testament, particularly in Leviticus chapter 19 and then again in Leviticus chapter 23, he talks about how to take care of those poor is to leave the edges of your field unpicked. Right. Don't pick all the grapes off the vine, leave some. It didn't say you pick it all and then you go give some to the guy who's not working. That's right. They've got to then come in. You consider in the book of Ruth where she had to come in and glean from the fields, and the gospel's the same way. You know, the Lord has really done all of the work for us. He's provided the grace and the mercy, but there's still a part of it that we have to do. You know, we wouldn't qualify it as a work that merits the salvation we have. So it's still benevolent to us to get to have salvation, but it can't be had without us, hearing, believing, repenting, confessing, and being baptized. And so it goes back. I'll hit the nail again. It goes back to showing the character of God the same way He showed to us mercy and grace. We show that to our fellow man.
I love the example of gleaning the fields because it was benevolence. The person left this, the fruit, the wheat, whatever it was in his field, and it's something that if he had gleaned it himself, he could have sold and made money, but he left it. It was benevolence, but they still had to come in and work hard. If you read the book of Ruth, she had to work very hard to acquire this. So it was more than just a handout. When he says in 2 Thessalonians, if a man won't work, neither should he eat, to get that benevolence, that man did have to work for it. And that is an important distinction. I remember someone telling me on one occasion after Hurricane Katrina several years ago that he and a group of individuals had gone down to help with the cleanup. And I think that's a good thing to do. But he said it was interesting because they took their tools and they went into some of these houses and they were tearing out the sheetrock, and it was damp and moldy, and they were working hard. And he said some of the able-bodied men who owned these houses would lay on the porch and watch them work.
Wow.
I think that relates to what we're talking about here.
I think that's it exactly.
If a man won't work, neither should he eat. Mm-hmm. And we can make judgments. Sometimes we're going to be taken advantage of because you don't know, but there's sometimes that it's clear, and that would be an example of what we might call bad benevolence.
I don't know if this ties in exactly to that, but in Hebrews 13, 15, and 16, the writer says, "By him, therefore, let us offer the sacrifice of praise to God continually, that is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. But to do good and to communicate, forget not." That word communicate carries with it the idea of a fellowship. And if I'm doing good and fellowshipping with this person, then we're working together.
That's right.
You know, I may be carrying the lion's share or the biggest part of the load or the financial strain, bringing the supplies or the tools, but the other person has just as much responsibility to fellowship with that in the same way.
Yeah. I think this is, it's a good discussion because sometimes people have the idea that as a Christian, if you see someone in need, you just indiscriminately give money. But I think the idea in the Bible is there is some judgment involved in this. You try to investigate it. That's why over the years I have tried to, rather than just give to the man on the street corner, I've actually tried to give to individuals that I know that are members of the church. What I found is in investigating those things, you find lots of people who are in need that you can legitimately give to, that you absolutely know is there. Of course, you're going to run across people sometimes, and sometimes you just have to go out on a limb, and as we said, sometimes you're going to be taken advantage of. It's interesting, several years ago, there was a news program by John Stossel. Is he still around? I don't know. But John Stossel had done a program where he went out on the road and he investigated people who stand on the corner and ask for money. And he said those people, what he had determined was most of those people, he said, were con artists. Mm-hmm. And he stood out there and he said that you could collect about $100 a day. He said that they were making good money. Of course, it was tax-free. And it was interesting to hear him talk about it because he had interviewed a person. In fact, if you go on YouTube and Google this, John Stossel and homeless people, I think it's still on there and you can watch it. But he interviewed someone who's supposed to be an expert in this area, and he was talking about the fact that they said that the majority of people who were doing this were drug users and people that were actually taking advantage. That has always left an impression on me. What am I saying with that? I'm not saying don't ever help somebody like that, but I'm saying Christians need to be good stewards, and we should investigate to the best that we can because there are good and righteous people. There are people that we can help legitimately. I don't want to give my money to someone, as you said, when they would come, they would go to the gas station, they could get gas, but they can't buy beer.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that we haven't mentioned, and just as kind of a word of caution, and it comes from the work that I do now, is a large portion of those that we would see as homeless in today's society right now are that way because of mental health issues. And even some people that in the past I have, wrongly probably, said, hey, they're just lazy. Yeah. I find out later that they have a mental health situation that I'm not aware of. Because all that, you can tell if somebody has lost a limb or something, but you can't tell what's going on inside. And so we just, and I'm just saying we need to be cautious of
I think that's a very good point.
We'll go back to judging someone to be, capable when they might not. And that's where that fellowship comes in, knowing the person and knowing what their need really is.
Yeah, that's a very excellent point. In Luke chapter 3 and verse 11, the Bible says, "He who has 2 tunics, let him give to him who has none, and he who has food, let him do likewise." I think it's interesting, he says that you give to him who has no tunic. What if this man already has 2 tunics? What if this man already has 3 tunics? It becomes a different situation. Mm-hmm. And so what you have is actually a qualifier. James chapter 2 and verse 14, "If a brother or sister is naked or destitute of daily food, and one of you says, 'Depart in peace, be warmed and filled,' but you do not give him the things that are needed for the body, what profit is it for you?" So James faults them when they don't provide for legitimate needs. And so I think it's interesting the Bible makes a distinction between wants and needs. The Bible mentions a tunic, which is clothing. Jesus said, I was hungry. That is food. I was thirsty. That is drink. James mentions naked and destitute. Again, food. And so in our society today, the reason I bring all this up is in our society today, we have maybe a different situation. We have people who might be on government handouts for food, and yet they're driving a fancy car and they have 2 color television sets in their house. Brother Robert, how do we deal with this sort of thing?
Well, I think, again, going back to discretion and using good judgment, and we should know the people, know who we are giving to. And sometimes, as we mentioned several times already, sometimes, you don't know. And the key is that when you see a brother have a need, or a sister, or anyone, and so the problem that we have, as we mentioned before, is the mystery, is when you don't know. What I've experienced is that in the Church of Christ, you have some very generous people. All the congregations I've been to, when they see a need, when it's obvious, I've always seen the church respond very positively to it. Yeah. It's just only when you're not sure about it, that's the difficult part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. If they want to give to the home where you work, Randy, is there a way to set it up where they can be debited monthly or something like that? Yes, if
they go to the PinevilleChildren'sHome.com website, the click to give button there will take them to a program where they can set it up. In fact, it's a church congregational type program that we use for that, to keep up with all of that. They'll be put on a mailing list to receive a quarterly where they see our budget and how we spend that money and where it goes. And we're very transparent to talk and help anybody be aware of what we do and how that money's used.
And is there a way that they can be aware of the children, to meet the families, the children that they would be supporting?
The families usually not so much. We do have opportunities at different times where they can come in and see the children. They provide gifts. We have people that come down and do birthday parties. So they're aware of the children and how many, and as that changes, and it's always fluctuating. But they're able to come down and meet them as well.
All right. Well, brethren, it has been good to have both of you on the program tonight. We appreciate so much the work that you're involved in with the Children's Home, the work that you do as an elder. An elder's work certainly involves benevolence. The most important thing always is that we want people to go to heaven. If we can reach out to them through benevolence and teach them the gospel, we have accomplished the greatest thing in the world, and that is to obey the gospel of Jesus Christ and that their soul may be saved eternally. We want to thank you tonight for joining us on GBNLive, and we'll hope that you will join us again next week. Good night.
This has been GBNLive. Thank you for watching.